Dr. Rebecca Jackson is Vice President of Programs and Outcomes for Brain Balance. Brain Balance is a nationally available drug free program designed to enhance cognitive performance and emotional well being by building and strengthening pathways in the brain that support cognitive abilities and performance using sensory engagement, physical development, academics, and nutrition. Dr. A.J. Marsden is a former U.S. Army surgical nurse who now serves as an assistant professor of human services and psychology at Beacon College. The Leesburg, Florida school is America's first accredited college or university dedicated to educating primarily neurodivergent students with learning and attention issues. So let's start the discussion with Dr. Jackson. Dr. Jackson, give us a working definition of working memory and an example of how it works in everyday life.
Working memory is our ability to hold information in our brain temporarily long enough so that we can manipulate that information until we need to use it. And then our brain, it's like a dry erase board. Once we use the information, our brain wipes that information clear so we can free up more space in our brain to remember more things. A great example of using working memory is if you're planning dinner and you're needing to go to the grocery store. If I decide that I'm going to make tacos for dinner and I need to think about the ingredients, I'll make a mental list. I need tortillas, meat, cheese, lettuce, salsa. So working memory allows me to remember that there are 5 items that I need to get at the store. But when I get to the store, I might need to pick up those items in a different order. So working memory allows me to change the order of that information while still remembering what it is that I need to do. So working memory has an impact on our planning, on our decisions, our behavior, and most of all, it underlies our ability to learn.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. And must I say, tacos. Dr. Marsden, are working memory issues native to any particular learning difference?
Yes and no. So oftentimes working memory issues coexist with every learning difference. So there are working memory deficits that have been directly linked to dyslexia, autism, and ADHD. So we know that those 2 things are definitely linked. With every learning difference, though, working memory is going to be impacted in some way. There's going to be some type of working memory issue. Dyslexia versus auditory processing disorder. So both of them are going to have working memory issues, but working memory is going to be affected a little bit differently in both those cases. So for an auditory processing disorder, for example, auditory working memory helps kids hold on to the sounds of things, right? Like if you're trying to read a word, it helps you hold on to the sound of each letter so you can put those sounds together to create a word. If you have auditory processing disorder, this working memory, this auditory working memory, just isn't going to work very well. There's going to be a little hitches in the giddy up that's going to make it difficult for people with auditory processing disorder to read and understand the sound of things. Visual working memory is also going to be hindered if you have something like dyslexia. Visual working memory works in a way where we can look at the word, and then while we're looking at the word, we can hold it in our short-term memory to finish out a sentence and remember what each of those words mean. If we have dyslexia, however, our working memory, again, there's going to be a little bit of a hitch in that giddy up. It's going to be difficult for them to overcome that. So yes, working memory issues occur with all learning differences, but in different ways.
Thank you, Dr. Marsden. Dr. Jackson, what are some of the critical ways that children use working memory every day and some telltale signs that a child is struggling with working memory?
We use working memory all day, every day. So our kids use it from everything when we say, hey, when you get up this morning, I want you to come downstairs and eat breakfast and don't forget to grab your lunch to bring to school today. Working memory allows us to keep that information active in our brain long enough to grab those items as you're walking out the door. So telltale signs that a child may be struggling with working memory, or an older student or adult, is that need for repetition. So if somebody's following directions and has a hard time remembering and sequencing the steps and directions, that can be related to working memory. If somebody needs more repetition in order to learn something, so more repetition than their peers and other students or individuals the same age, again, that can be a sign that there's some struggle there with the working memory.
Thank you. Let me follow up with you, Dr. Jackson. So is it really possible to teach a child with learning differences to remember not to forget?
Absolutely. There's a combination of both strategies, so kind of coping mechanisms to help all of us not only survive but thrive. But then there's also the ability to strengthen those networks and pathways in the brain. And that's the exciting thing about what science is showing us these days is where you're at now doesn't mean you're going to be stuck in that same place going forward. So you can practice and strengthen using those networks and pathways so that you become more successful going forward. And then also learning those habits and routines and life strategies that can support success in working memory can benefit all of us.
Thank you. Dr. Marsden, it seems that before parents can begin to help, they would need to know the extent of the problem. How can parents test their child's working memory limits?
That's a good question, Daryl. So remember that working memory is being able to hold on to and use information, right? So we talked about that earlier. Younger kids are going to have a much harder time with that than older kids already. So keep that in mind. Younger kids are going to have a harder time with working memory than older kids. So it is possible for you to get your child professionally tested with something like the Comprehensive Assessment Battery for Children that specifically looks at working memory, or the Automated Working Memory Assessment. So you could definitely get them professionally tested, but before you spend the money to do that, there are a couple early warning signs that you could look for at home. So first, just like Dr. Jackson was talking about, does your child have a hard time remembering instructions or sequence? Do they have to ask you to repeat yourself often? Do they lose track of complicated tasks and oftentimes have to restart things or get confused about things? Are they easily distracted? These are all things that you can ask yourself as you observe your child. And if you say yes to a number of these, then that could be, again, some warning signs. So next, you might want to kind of test them. I don't like using the word test, but you can kind of test them a little bit at home and see if there's additional issues with their working memory. So one of the games that you could play at home is give a list of like 5 animals to your son or daughter and ask them to remember those animals. These could be fun animals that they really like, right? Unicorn, cat, dog, horse, things like that. Just easy stuff. And tell them, remember these 5 things because I'm going to ask you about them later. And then have them do some type of fun, kind of simple math test or something like that. Say, okay, I have 5 friends, I have 10 cookies. How many cookies does each of my friends get? Have them do some type of different activity. And then when you're done with that, go back to the list and say, hey, do you remember any of those animals that I asked you to remember earlier? And if they can't remember any of them, that's probably a good indication that there's something wrong with their working memory. It's not the best. Now, little kids are not going to be able to do that as well as older kids, so keep that in mind too. There's definitely age-related memory activities and games that you can play with your kids, but there's loads of information out there for parents.
Thank you. And let me follow up with you, Dr. Marsden. Dr. Jackson mentioned of the existence of strategies that parents can employ to help strengthen their child's working memory, but strategy sounds pretty dreary and boring and laborious. But are there any fun ways that parents can help their kids beef up their working memory?
Absolutely. There's tons of ways, tons of fun things that you can do to work on working memory. And you don't have to call them tests or strategies or anything like that. They're fun games. They're probably things that you have in your closet right now that would work on working memory and you don't even realize it. So for example, the game memory or concentration, that's great for working memory. The game Simon, where you have to follow the pattern to the different colors and the different sounds. That's a great working memory game. Lots of activity books. If you have an activity book that has like 2 different pictures and it's like what's missing in this picture or that picture, great for working memory. All of these things are fun little activities that you and your child could do together that are great for building and improving their working memory. However, there is a little controversy in the research that suggests that doing these types of games, yes, improves working memory, but only that specific type of working memory. So it only improves memory for that specific type of task, and it doesn't necessarily generalize to other tasks. However, there's been a good amount of research that shows that these types of brain activities are really, really beneficial for people with ADHD and autism. So there are lots of fun things that you can do at home that would improve your child's working memory pretty quickly.
Okay. Dr. Jackson, one memory strategy that I've heard a lot about is chunking. What is that and how does that work?
When I think of chunking, I always envision, a telephone number. A telephone number is grouped the way it is because of this chunking strategy. So a 10-digit telephone number has the digit 1 in front, the 3 digits the 3 digits and the 4 digits, because that's how our brain works. So our brain has a hard time looking at something and capturing all 10 digits in one quick glance. So instead, our brain can often reasonably hold about 4 chunks of information. So by grouping things together in smaller chunks can help our brain more easily remember it. So if you're doing a task with your child, grouping things together by category or by activity or task can help them retain and recall and utilize that information more successfully. So if you're thinking about getting ready and out the door in the morning, maybe first you chunk things by, hey, what's everything that you need to do upstairs to get ready for the day? Have you brushed your teeth? Have you made your bed? Did you put your shoes on before you come downstairs? That could be one chunk of all the things that you need to do upstairs. Then you can chunk the things that you need to do downstairs in the kitchen. Did you grab your lunch and your water bottle and your backpack? So those can be a great way to help remember a good amount of information in smaller groupings.
All right. Dr. Marsden, another strategy that people talk about often is visualization. Can you help us visualize how this strategy works?
Yes, of course. So visualization works by creating a mental representation of something that you're trying to accomplish, whether this be a goal or a task or whatever it might be. So for example, in my research classes, I ask students to visualize the scientific method. So first, of course, I explain what it is. Then I show them the scientific method broken down in memes to help them kind of understand. And that's something that they're really familiar with too. So they like it, they think it's funny, and it helps them connect to the material. Then I ask them to visualize themselves actually following through with the scientific method, the process of it. So visualize yourself coming up with a hypothesis, visualize yourself collecting data, gathering that data, et cetera, et cetera. So they have to visualize themselves doing it. Basically, visualization works by decreasing our working memory, the load of our working memory that's associated with that challenging task. So just like with any memory task, the students or your child is making a personally meaningful connection with that material. Whenever they visualize themselves doing something, they're making a meaningful connection with that material. So later, when they pull up that information, when they're asked to pull up that information, they pull up that visualization as well, and it makes the connections much faster. It makes the brain work much faster. So it's actually a really cool technique that works really well, and it's something that we use in therapy as well. It can be used to decrease anxiety and increase motivation. By visualizing something that's really anxiety provoking, like taking a test, for example, or having to do math problems, by visualizing yourself doing the test and then having a successful outcome, it actually makes your reactions to it, your negative reactions to it a little bit lower, right? So your anxiety and your stress decreases, your motivation to do well on the test increases, and then you usually end up having a better result because of it. So visualization can be a really great tool to use.
All right. Dr. Jackson, homework is a working memory assembly line from knowing and recording the assignment to doing the work to it landing on the teacher's desk. And judging from my own personal experience, there are few things more frustrating to a parent than having helped a child complete an assignment only to find out the child received a 0 on it because they didn't turn it in. How can parents address the homework horror show?
There's several things that can be really helpful here. And one of the first things to consider is we all have what I like to think of as your working memory bandwidth, meaning kind of what are my general capabilities. But my abilities, even within myself, can vary from day to day. So being aware of what are the things that chip away at our working memory capabilities. When we're tired, for example, a tired brain has a harder time retaining and accessing information. So before sitting down for homework, making sure your child is well rested. Fuel is another key resource for the brain. The brain can't run without the right fuel and resources, just like a car. So making sure that prior to homework time, your child has had a snack, preferably something with protein, to help fuel the brain for a long amount of time. Distractions can also interfere with our working memory. You can picture yourself working on a task, and if you get interrupted, you have a harder time shifting back to that task. So making sure you create a homework space in your home that's as minimally distracting as possible. Keeping in mind life with kids and dogs can be hard to do, but creating an environment that is a calm, quiet environment, minimizing the multitasking. These are all strategies to help set you up for success as you approach homework. Then for strategies to get through the homework itself, using those visual cues and reminders can be really helpful. So if you get your child into the habit of first writing down their to-do list with the due date next to it, and then getting into habits of checking things off when you completed it, as well as then as when you turned it in. So creating habits and routines are something that makes things easier for our brain. If we do the same routine and structure all of the time, then it takes less energy to try to remember, gosh, what do I do next? If we function the same way every time, we sit down in this calm, consistent environment, we write our to-do list, we check it off when we complete it, we check it off when we turn it in, that becomes a natural strategy and routine for your child that they'll take with them, not just through homework, but going through into life and work in general.
Good advice. Good advice. Dr. Marsden, are there strategies that parents should pivot to as their child moves from elementary through high school through college, or does the toolkit stay pretty much the same?
Regardless of age, we know that there are a couple things that work. If they're a young child, if they're an older child, if you're an adult, these couple things definitely work. And Dr. Jackson talked about a couple of them. The first one is create a routine, create some type of routine. Routines help decrease the load of our working memory because it's something that we know what to do, right? We basically become on autopilot. So create a routine, create a morning routine, create an after school routine, create a before you go to bed routine. Create those routines, and that'll help build really solid neural pathways. So then that way it's not so difficult for them in the morning when they get up and they're trying to get ready for school. They have a routine, they know what they're supposed to do. So create a routine for them. Next, take those big assignments or those big goals that they have and break them down into little chunks. That will help decrease the working memory load, and it'll also help them achieve those goals, obviously. So if you take those, I do this with big assignments, right? In some of my classes, they have 10 or 15 page papers that they have to write. That seems really overwhelming at first. So take it in little chunks, right? So I say, this is what you have to do first. Get this done by this day. I give you 2 weeks to do this one little thing. Next, I'm going to give you 2 weeks to do this next little thing. So break each thing down into much smaller steps. And then within those steps, if you need to, say, this is what you need to do. For step 1, do this, this, and this. For step 2, do this, this, and this. Break it down really, really small for them so they can do it in little chunks. Next, get organized. Again, this works at every age. For younger kids, you might want to use things like color coding or something like that they can look at a chart and they can see, okay, today I'm supposed to do this and this. This is my chore chart. As they get older, maybe you don't necessarily need to do color coding, but maybe you want to create a to-do list for them. So one thing that you might do is every morning on the bathroom mirror, you might want to write down for your teen son or daughter, these are the things that you have to do today, right? Or maybe you just want to leave them a nice note and say, good morning, I love you. Here's a couple of things that I want you to do today. So get organized, have to-do lists, color codings, reminders, right? Set up your Google Home or your Alexa to do a bunch of different reminders. Finally, encourage your son or daughter, regardless of how old they are, to ask you questions if they get lost. And do not make them feel stupid for asking you questions if they don't understand how to do something. Create an environment where they feel comfortable asking questions, that they don't feel like they'll be ridiculed if they ask you something. So create a very supportive learning environment for them.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And we're going to close with some closing remarks from each of you. Dr. Jackson, any additional thoughts on working memory and how to make both the home life and the school life successful for these families who are dealing with this issue?
Sure. Working memory strategies benefit both the kids and the parents. And I love as parents to model these behaviors for the kids. And in the end, it's going to benefit your brain as well. One of the key things to help with working memory is exercise. If you've got an important task to do where you're needing to pay attention, hold on to a lot of information and apply it, taking a little bit of time to exercise prior to that moment has been shown to actually increase the success with working memory. So showing your kids that that's what you do as a strategy for success can set a great example for them, and also encouraging them to do the same. If they're going into an important test or a lecture or a homework task on a subject that is challenging for them, taking a little time to exercise prior to doing that can be a really simple, positive strategy to help. And my final parting words goes back to what we talked about earlier, is minimizing distractions. We live in a world of technology that is constantly capturing and pulling our attention. Each time you're working on something and your email dings to say a new message came in, or a text on your phone, each time that happens, that pulls your attention from the task, which can deteriorate working memory. So when you're focused to get something done, minimizing all of those distractions is going to help you be the most successful you can be within your bandwidth for working memory.
All right. And Dr. Marsden, you have the final word.
All right. I guess the big takeaways with working memory is spend some time with your children, right? Play some games with them, get to know them, read to them if they're little. That's one of the biggest indicators of academic success later in life, is if you read to your children. Read to your children, read multiple books to your children, read to them until they don't want you to read to them anymore, until they can read on their own. And then when they can read on their own, encourage them to read on their own. Eliminate distractions, just like Dr. Jackson said. But more importantly than all of that is really spend time with your children, and don't just spend superficial time where you're on your phone or you're watching TV together. Spend some one-on-one time with them and really try to understand what they're struggling with, talk to them about what they're struggling with, and then of course research and try to find ways that you can help them. So there's tons of ways that we can improve children's working memory, and if we just take our time and work with them, we can definitely do something.
All right. Dr. A.J. Marsden and Dr. Rebecca Jackson, thanks for the knowledge.